We the Living. This book very much felt like a return to form. The book is separated into parts rather than just one long book. There are many chapters that are separated by 3 stars. There is some heavy political undertone, as well as just other little general things that I have come to expect from this author. The way that she describes her setup, as well as having multiple romantic partners. Let us start with the setting. Our story takes place in Russia. The Tsar has just been assassinated, and the communist regime is starting to reign supreme. Now, as this is a common theme of the book, I feel like there's a few little things I better describe here. So the first thing is that communism, all throughout the years, has always been represented with the color red. Now, those that were in favor of the Tsar's control were white. The main reason for this is because of the uniforms that both forces wore while they were clashing with each other. And then also just kind of a little bit about Russian history, just in case. So, in Russia, instead of having a king, which their Russian name for king was Tsar, which is spelled in 2 different ways depending on where you're from. Now, the Tsar, according to the people, were very oppressive. So in comes along 2 very famous people. We have Karl Marx, who through his work, the Communist Manifesto, laid out the basic idea of communism. Now, the general idea for communism is that the workers should come together, rise up, and take out the bourgeoisie. Now, according to the theory of communism, there's 2 classes. You got the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. Now, the bourgeoisie is the people that are making all the money and benefiting off of the proletariat, the hard workers. So the idea is that the proletariat would take over, and then everybody would be on equal footing. They'd all be the proletariat. Enter Vladimir Lenin, the leader of the communist revolution in Russia. He took the ideals of Karl Marx and he attempted to make a government out of it. And that is the basic undertone that this story begins in. So with the setting out of the way, we are introduced pretty quickly to our major protagonist, the Argonova family. In the days of the Tsar, they ran a rather profitable textile company, but as the communist revolution was raging, they figured they would head to the southern region of Crimea, where it was still kind of under the Tsar's control. About 3 years pass, and they figure it's safe to return back. However, they find out they were dead wrong. Now, I feel like this is just kind of a particular quirk of Ayn, a lot like how Hayao Miyazaki likes to have planes in most of his work. I'm pretty sure she just loves to have trains in her work, because they go into deep detail about how the trains were very important, how everything ran on time. It was the life vessel of the country. And now that the communist regime has taken over, everybody is just waiting so desperately to be able to get on their train and to be able to get wherever they need to go. Nothing is on time, and the trains are overcrowded. She gets very descriptive about this part. It's very dirty. You feel sorry for all those poor people that actually did have lives, but basically got thrown out the window with the new administration. So back in Petrograd, they meet up with an old friend who was living in just the most run-down, ransacked apartment. But at the same time, that's pretty high-scale living for the conditions at this time. They tell them that their old estate, which was a grand mansion overlooking the lake, had been taken over by a communist painter, and that most of the major stuff has been stolen by a lot of the proletariat. So the friend is able to give them living arrangements, at least for a few nights, until they can find a suitable place of their own. They were able to talk to this poster maker to find that he's actually kind of reasonable. he doesn't want anything that belonged to those snooty bourgeoisie anyway, so he's just kind of giving them some random furniture here and there, as well as a few other essentials. One of the major things about this new regime is what's known as ration cards. Essentially, these are given to people that either work for the government, have very good jobs that support the proletariat, or those that are going to a university. Kira is very much encouraged to go to the university, and she very much wants to. Now, what I find so fascinating about this section is it almost seems a bit of a feminist mystique, so to speak. Kira wants to go into engineering. She wants to design bridges and buildings and the like. But a lot of people in her family, including one of her cousins, says that women can't do that. That's not something women can do. And to that she just kind of goes, oh yeah? Watch me. Now at the university, she is paying close attention to a lecture. And while she meets a few friends there, she offhandedly says how much she hates this new regime. So, somebody comes up from behind her and looks at her saying, do you know what you're saying? This is Andre, a member of the GPU, which the best I can gather is the GPU is a branch of the KGB, which basically is in charge of sending people to the gulags when you are not conforming. However, Kira being so strong-willed honestly kind of terrifies him a little bit. But what's even more interesting is that they form a little bit of a friendship. Her being a hardcore capitalist and him being the hardcore communist, they often get into little debates, just trying to understand why each thinks that their way is the best. This next section is a little weird. So Kira agrees to go on a date with one of her cousins. It seemed like it was going nice when all of a sudden Victor seems to kind of jump on her. She doesn't put up with it, and she quickly disposes of him. Not like, more like in the way of, yes, this creep has been following me around all night, and not wanting to deal with the consequences, runs off. As she is walking home, she bumps into this mysterious man. They talk very little, but there's something about their eyes that seem to talk a lot about each other. Both of them have very similar beliefs and will not be corrupted by this new regime. They talk for a little bit, but this mysterious man ultimately leaves a cryptic message saying, I want to try to meet you here 3 months from now, provided I am not killed or taken away. The university seems to be going alright. Kira has met up with Andre a few times and thus is strengthening the relationship. A few months pass and Kira meets this mysterious stranger again. Now, this is where it gets interesting. During this meeting, Andre actually watched her and found that she is meeting this mysterious man. The next day, she is brought in for questioning, trying to figure out where this person is stationed and what she knows about him. Well, that's probably the main reason he was so mysterious, isn't it? Because she doesn't know anything about him. After a few more rounds of questions, she's free to go. But they do find her a little suspicious that she's not really catching on to these communist rules that are in place. So another 3 months pass and they meet up again. This man finally introduces himself as Leo. Now during this time, Leo asks Kira to escape the country with him. And without a second thought, she just goes with him. I mean, seeing that she's such a level-headed character, this seems a little out of left field. But maybe it's more about the idea that she likes the mystery, as well as the idea that this man is uncorruptible, much like her. So they try to escape on a smuggling sailboat, but unfortunately they get caught by the border patrol. Now Leo was actually being quite a gentleman about this, and makes it seem like that he stole Kira away and she was a hostage in order for him to try to escape. Once again, she is brought in for a round of questions, but is quickly released. While this Leo has gone to prison for a little while. Since they're not able to get much the stick on this guy, they just let him go. Now, in addition to trying to flee the country, Leo's father was known to be a very proud counter-revolutionary, and that is the main reason that he was living on the run. However, they find that he has no counter-revolutionary leanings and decide to let him go, as well as live in his father's old apartment. At this time, Leo goes to Kira's house. They talk for a little bit, and the parents, as well as her older sister, can't stand Leo after realizing that he was escaped from prison and now wants to run away with them. And then after Kira saying that, yeah, they have made passionate love together more than once, her mother disowns her. But she is all too glad to leave and to start her new life with Leo. Now from there, it just seems like everything goes from bad to worse. There's a purge, as they call it, where basically all those that are not loyal to the cause are kicked out of the university and not allowed to ever come back in. Now because Kira's family used to serve in the bourgeoisie class, she is immediately expelled. And then from there, she's trying to find a job, but nobody wants her. Usually, most interviews they talk about, it just kind of goes like this. So, are you a member of the party? No. Have you been working before? No. Who are your parents? No. Well, we don't have any positions at this time. And then other ones, it's just like, are you a member of the party? No. Get out. And then it just was back and forth from there like crazy. Even Leo was having a very hard time trying to find a job for the very same reasons. Being a counter-revolutionary is not too favorable in this new regime. Later on, Kira has a bit of a date with Andre, where they go to this relatively nice restaurant, and Andre orders a nice little dessert for Kira. Kira immediately picks it up and just eats it like an animal. Andre immediately recognizes that she has gone several days without food. Feeling sorry for her, he buys a whole meal for her. In addition to that, Andre is also able to get her a job. It's not a very classy one, but it's something to be able to make enough money to be able to survive. Leo was also able to get a job as well, but it's all in hard physical labor. And all this hasn't come down with a bad case of tuberculosis. Now, after a lot of convincing, Leo goes to a doctor, and that's what his diagnosis is. The only way to cure it is to go to a sanatorium for 3 months. Kira tries going all over the place, trying to secure him a place, but obviously no one is budging. All the sanatoriums are filled with worthy members of the party that have been true to the proletariat cause. Well, the counter-revolutionary, it's like, oh, well, there's no place for him. You know what, let him die anyway, we don't want him. It's never explicitly said, but it's very heavily implied that Kira ends up sleeping with Andre, and that is what is able to get Leo off to a proper sanatorium. Part 1 ends with Leo boarding the train and Kira just being devastated that the love of her life is gone. Part 1 was very much doom and gloom, but Part 2 really picks it up a little bit. While Leo is away, Kira is actually living quite comfortably. While word is getting around that she is a mistress to Andre, she doesn't care, as he's able to buy some of the greatest things that just aren't possible in Russia without either being rich or a smuggler. She has custom-made lighters, custom-made dresses, beautiful hats, makeup, fancy perfumes, basically everything that all the European women had at the time that were not in Russia. After those 3 months, Leo returns home. He doesn't necessarily seem too happy about this, though. But that doesn't last for too long, as he bumps into an old friend of Antonia Pavlovna, which I don't know what it is. That name sounds very familiar. Maybe that was a character from War and Peace? That would be kind of funny since both novels are very much based in Russia. But all the same, that's really going to annoy me. I know I've heard that name somewhere else before. Now, she has a prospect. Her husband works in food distribution and is greased as well. He knows somebody very high up in the GPU and can get away with a few things. Now, the basic idea is that she is inviting Leo to be a business partner. What the business is that they're going to take, like, say, an extra crate of food every so often and sell it at a supermarket for a reasonable price. All parties will be satisfied as this informant for the GPU will be paid off. The husband will be paid, and Leo, of course, will be paid. As it's a very lucrative business, all will be very well compensated. But obviously, this is quite a dangerous job. If any of them were to be caught, they would most likely be put before the firing squad, if not worse. However, here we really see that Leo has really changed. While Leo, for the most part, has been uncorruptible by this new regime, it seems like this trip to the sanatorium, he's just basically given up on living. So he figures he's just going to live the high life as long as he possibly can. So he takes whatever money he wants and he just spends it on the most lavish things, going drinking every night and just having an all-around good time with Antonia. Well, Kira, rightfully so, is rather annoyed by this because she wants to build up a fund to be able to go abroad, hopefully to escape this horrible regime. But unfortunately, most of the money is just kind of thrown away through all these lavish parties and just Leo living it up. Now, during one of these benders, Leo accidentally spends the hush money for the GPU. The husband obviously knows the ramifications for this whole thing. It does not leave the house for several days. The informant keeps sending him messages about how he wants to be paid and full. One such message was handwritten on a little piece of paper and then shoved right under the door. He takes this and puts it in his pocket. That night, he goes to a rather high-scale nightclub, so to speak, where all the really rich government employees live. There he is able to con some of the money. But before he can leave straight with this money, he talks with this old friend of Andre's. Essentially, he has lost faith in the Communist Party and just decided to kind of drink his brains out. So they get to talking about how it's not really about what you know, it's who you know, and you gotta learn to blackmail, you gotta learn to steal, to cheat, do a whole lot of bad things to get anywhere in life. The husband is just about to leave, but unfortunately he drops that little note and the best friend gets it. Now, fortunately for the husband, this friend committed suicide, and when they found his body, the note was not found. So he is relieved to tell his informant that the money is paid and that nobody knows about it. However, before he died, he sent that letter to Andre, as well as his suicide note. With this newfound information, Andre can't stand by and let this scheme go on anymore. So he investigates it, not knowing that Kira is actually madly in love with Leo, who is single-handedly taking the blame for all of this. There's a ransack, and he is charged with stealing surplus food. Kira once again has it out with Andre, and through her feminine ways, as well as through a really good speech. Luckily not nearly as long as the John Galt speech, but still just as effective. Andre is able to free Leo. However, once again, Leo is ungrateful. The basic thing is, when he first came down with tuberculosis, he actually kind of wanted to die. But when he came back from the sanatorium, it seemed like he had a new vigor for life. And then after this, it's made very clear that Leo has just given up and he just wants to die in any way possible. And Kira, as well as Andre, will not let him do it. Now, I will say I was a little disappointed that Leo actually didn't get to go to trial for his crime. It's made very clear that Leo has given up on life. So while the KGB would try to influence him with saying certain answers, it's very obvious he wouldn't budge because he wants to die either way. I was hoping it'd be very much like Hank Reardon's case in Atlas Shrugged. The idea that both just tell it exactly what it is, and then everyone around is just shocked, and they have no choice but to let him go, because if they try to deny this is the truth, then people are going to realize that something is being hidden. Now, while that was a great favor of Andre, it very much hurt his public view. He was demoted and sent to a rather diminutive job of a librarian clerk. He works on this for a few days until he just eventually gives up and commits suicide. When the papers come out, they talk about another great hero that died for the proletariat cause. That's another big theme of this book that I haven't mentioned yet, is that you very much have to prove that you're worthy to the cause. You have to join clubs. You have to worship how great the regime is. If you seem to not be fulfilling your social obligation, then you are blackballed, and people that work with you will be more likely to kick you out. They're less likely to give you good food in the breadline, and you're just likely to succeed in a lot of different things. This funeral is very much one of those social obligations. Since he was quite a major player in the party, everybody shows up to this funeral. It is just massive. At the end of it, there's a giant speech about how communism is the greatest form on earth and that they're creating the greatest experiment to ever grace all of humanity. There is one lone female figure that stares at the gravestone, Kira. She wonders if maybe it was her that drove him to suicide, or maybe it was just his disillusionment of the system that eventually drove him to do it. A few days later, Kira's mind is made up. She has had enough of having to live in these conditions. Through every single penny she earns, she is able to scrap up enough to be able to get an escape route to nearby Latvia. There's an underground railroad, so to speak. You have to buy maps as well as an all-white skies. That way it's easier to hide yourself in the snow from patrols. How she is able to do this is that she uses her mother's wedding gown as well as an old polar bear rug that used to adorn their mansion. She stays the night at one of the conductor's shacks, so to speak. They feed her, and she is given directions to go on her merry way. Snow is very thick, but she trudges along at a very hefty speed. She is very much filled with this hope and this pride that she is able to do something about this situation, that she may be able to start living again in nearby Latvia. She goes for what seems to be like hours across several miles, when all of a sudden she hears footsteps. She comes face to face with the border patrol. Luckily, she is able to duck under the snow right away so that he doesn't notice it. However, he's still not convinced that he's not the only one there. So he lets out a stray shot, hopefully scaring like a bunny or a fox or whatever else may have run away. This bullet ends up striking her in the ribs, probably around there, I would guess. The strangest thing is she's not very much affected by this bullet. While it does kind of burn and it's annoying that she's leaving little blood droplets everywhere, it doesn't seem to be entirely painful or make her tired. So she just goes on for a few more hours, a few more miles. The wind is getting more intense. The wound is opening up more, and she just all of a sudden starts to feel very warm. Now, this is a sign of extreme hypothermia. I've heard that under some extreme conditions, people will find themselves sweating profusely or in their underwear when it's like -10 out. Very much the same thing here. A mixture of hypothermia and just not being able to get up again. It slowly starts to fade. But at the same time, there's a bit of a smile on her face. She can finally be free of this communist regime. And the book ends with her closing her eyes for one last time. Whenever I start a new book, I always have two major questions. The first one is, where did they get the title from? And what is the illustration supposed to represent? Well, I think I finally got it. It's probably the best way I can explain why it's called We the Living. There was a Pixar movie that came out several years ago called WALL-E. Without getting too deep in the details, basically humanity is left out in space, with hopefully the dreams of coming back to Earth many years later. However, the autopilot of this craft has been told many years ago that they are not allowed to return to Earth under any conditions. The human captain can't stand this and says one very powerful line. So the autopilot tells the captain, "Here you will survive." And the captain says, "I don't want to survive, I want to live." And that is very much where the title of this book comes from. We the Living. It's made very obvious that under this communist regime, you have to be a mindless drone. The less you think, the better off you are. You just shut up, you follow orders. If you follow orders exemplary well, they promote you. But that is not living. That is what Kira and Leo do. They attempt to actually live, to enjoy life, to actually be able to do something that involves thought or anything wholesome. And that, I am pretty sure, is also the cover here. So I'm pretty sure this is supposed to be Kira in the dress, and this is supposed to be Leo up here. As I said, towards the end, Leo started to fade, but Kira didn't want to give up on him. And that is why he appears to be looking the other way, and that she is on her knees begging for him to live. Now, what I find more interesting is what's on the back, actually. So we have the same picture that was on the front, but we also have this little caption here. "You would die to live and love." For a while, this last part kind of perplexed me, but after finishing the story, I think it all makes sense. She was willing to make that treacherous trip to Latvia, and actually preferred death so that she would live. And that, I think, is where it comes from. And I think the love there is not so much for Leo, but for life itself. Then probably the other thing I just simply don't understand is this little bottom part right here. In all honesty, I still don't really know who these three people are. I mean, it's pretty obvious that Kira would not submit to tyranny. Leo seemed that way at the beginning, but then kind of gave up afterwards. Now, there is mention that Kira has an older sister that fell in love with a hardcore counter-revolutionary known as Sasha. And while Sasha, I think here in America, is more associated with a more feminine persona, it's masculine. I mean, it'd be kind of shocking to have a lesbian couple in a book from the 40s, now wouldn't it? But I'm going to guess that's who the other two are. Unless perhaps maybe they're also talking about Andre. I mean, he was a hardcore believer in the communist system, but then when he realized that the system is no longer as pure as he thought, he ended his life because he would not submit to their tyranny. As for the book itself, I found this to be rather hard to get through. Just like Atlas Shrugged, she is able to give beautiful descriptions as well as thought-provoking and interesting characters. But it's just so doom and gloom. It just seems like there's absolutely no hope. It's kind of similar to the Grapes of Wrath, but unlike the Grapes of Wrath, there is actually a sign of hope. And this book actually ends. Kind of funny that I'm comparing her to Steinbeck. I kind of thinking I did that as well in my Atlas Shrugged review. Part 2, though, I'd say is where it picks up. This is where you start to actually understand the characters. You really start to enjoy the idea that there's all this tanglement around between the two. Like, for example, Andre's friend is actually that member of the GPU that they're paying the hush money for. Then you start to realize that sometimes there's a connection between the family members, between the uncles and the cousins. And then after enough time, you start to remember them, and then you can kind of look back and be like, oh yeah, I remember when that happened earlier. But you really gotta get past that part 1. It's just doom and gloom, and in all honesty, I relate to it so much. About how Kira can't get a job because there's one qualification she doesn't meet, or some other stupid reason or none such. And it just leaves you either angry or depressed, or maybe even fearful, as there seems to be more of a push towards this form of government now. Or at least that's just my opinion. Let's not get too much into politics, though. I will admit, though, very much like Atlas Shrugged, Ayn saves the best for last. That last chapter of Kira sneaking through the snow to get to Latvia. I found it very hard to put down, and I just wanted to keep seeing. Would she make it? Come on, you can keep going. You're a very strong, independent woman. You know this isn't going to get to you. No, don't die. Don't lie. No! But I will definitely appreciate that. While it is a bit of a sour note to end on, at least it's made very clear that she's dead. In the Grapes of Wrath, it is very much set up that it would be better if they were dead. But they didn't really say that, basically. There's just a giant rainstorm and everything's flooding, and everyone's held up in a barn and possibly dies of pneumonia afterwards. He doesn't say. She does. Probably the last thing I want to mention about this book. Ayn says that she very much based the character of Kira on herself. And I can kind of see that, as Kira was very much interested in being an engineer. And I'm pretty sure Ayn was very much the same way. She talks very importantly about railroads, about architecture, about smelting, about hard industrial business. It's very much seen both in this book and far more so in Atlas Shrugged. In all honesty, I wouldn't mind reading an autobiography about her. I mean, obviously she didn't sneak away in her mother's wedding dress, get shot, and died between the border between here and Latvia. But the way she describes communist Russia, it seems almost impossible that she could have left the country. Of course, it could be possible that maybe her father was maybe a hardcore proletariat, and maybe she was able to get some sort of visa to get to the United States from there. But it's made very obvious that her ideals are not of communism, but more of capitalism. And if you read Atlas Shrugged, laissez-faire capitalism. So, would I recommend it? Well, if you've read some of the other books by Ayn Rand and you'd like to see where she started, it's a pretty good place. It's kind of amazing that she was actually able to develop such a form here. It seems like with a lot of people, whenever they go for their first movie, their first book, you can kind of see a few problems here and there, and well, I will admit, Kira running away with Leo seemed a little weird, but everything else is there. Interesting characters, political undertones, beautiful descriptions, everything that I've come to expect from this author. I hope you'll join me next time for what is debated to be one of the author's seminal works, The Fountainhead. I've read a little bit of the book so far, and I gotta tell you, it's really good. From that first page, I was just instantly hooked. The only problem is I just can't seem to find the time to read it. I seem to be so busy lately. But all the same, I hope you will join me for my little review of this book. Until next time, keep having fun.